Nancy, how are you, honey?
I'm good. God is good. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today. How you feeling?
Well, thank you for having me, but I have to admit I'm a little nervous because I've never been on a podcast before.
So I'm the first. I love
You
it.
you are. And I have said no to so many opportunities. Like, you have no idea. 2022 was like 2021, 2022 was like my year of no. Like, I just said no to so many people. And this year I was like, okay, I can't continue to keep saying no. I'm gonna say yes. And then here you are, here you show up, right?
Listen, once you make the decision, God starts to send you all of the opportunities so that you could fulfill that which you have spoken into your life, which is I love that you have, or that you're being intentional this year about saying yes.
Mm-hmm.
So before we get into the conversation, I want you to just introduce yourself to my listeners, to my viewers. You are an incredible woman of faith, and I think that is what, at least for me, really attracts me to you as I continue my own journey. On my own Christ journey. I'm still a baby. Like in this, I was talking about this yesterday in my stories. But I got saved in 2019, so I'm a baby. I'm just learning to like crawl. So I'm really intentional about surrounding myself with women who can help me develop my faith, who can help me on the journey, because it's hard. It's
Say
hard.
that again.
But yes,
It doesn't get easier either.
what was that?
And it doesn't get easier either. There's just more conviction and there's more authority from from you, right? And discipline, but it doesn't get easier.
No, it absolutely doesn't. So introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about who is Ivette Guzman.
Oh, well,
And you can provide as much detail as you want or as little. Like there's no pressure. But share with us, I guess, who you are, is it that you do, and whatever.
so I will say this. My answer to that question was very different a couple of years ago. So I changed it to I am the daughter to the king first. I am a wife, I'm a mother, and real estate is how I make a living.
I love that you said real estate is how you make a living, and that you're not a realtor or a real estate agent, that you have not assigned that label to you. And I think that that's so important, because so many of us walk around the world assigning labels to ourselves that are based on the things that we do versus who we are, who God created us to be, and like who we're ultimately becoming. And then the fact that you also prefaced it with saying that how you would describe yourself is different today than it was 2 years ago, I think is also important, because what it shows is that we're always evolving.
Right.
At least that's the hope, right? Like we don't ever want to just be one thing for the rest of our lives.
Right. Well, that was the thing, is that before it was like I'm an avid entrepreneur. I've had businesses prior to real estate. It was what I loved to describe myself as, is I'm an entrepreneur, I'm driven, all these incredible labels that still identify who I am, right? It's still part of the descriptive words that could be used to describe who I am, but it's not who encompasses Ivette, right? And I learned just not too long ago, where it's like, no, who I am first here on earth, the first layer that you see is that I am the daughter to Christ first and foremost. So yes, I'm a mother of two. I have my daughter is in her first year in college. My son is 11. He's a baseball player. I've been married, just celebrated 20 years. I've been with my husband for 22. And and pretty much growing my faith as much as I can, intentionally. Um, but yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Has your faith always been a priority for you throughout your life? Or was that something that became more of a priority, kind of as you grow through life, you gain different experiences, like what has that journey been like for you?
So here's the interesting part is that I was born in the gospel. My mother's Christian. She was a born again Christian. She grew up Catholic, and in her 20s was invited to a Pentecostal church. Immediately fell in love, with Christ differently. And she has devoted her life to Christ ever since. So I was born in the gospel. However, I met Jesus when I turned 33.
Oof, oh, your Jesus year.
And then I then found out that, that was the Jesus year. And I was like, oh my life, I've never heard of this. But that's when I met him. So although I didn't have this I didn't have the upbringing where it was like, I had to unlearn things, and my parent, my parents taught me something that it wasn't right. That was not my case.
Right. Had
My
always known
mother
the Lord. You had always known Jesus.
always known. My mother has always been a very prayerful, devoted Christian, right? With her flaws, but that's what I saw in my home. And so it was great, like I think like every person that grows up, with the gospel is like you go through your rebellion year. I always knew that there was God. God was always in my life, but I met him intimately at 33.
And what was that experience like? And I think it's important to talk about that because Christians, those of us that have been saved, those, born again, we each talk about like our own personal encounter with God. And I think for those who have not had that yet, or they may wonder, well, what is that? What does that look like? What was that for you?
For me, the best way that I can put it is it was literally like, when you're about to go to bed and you take your sabana and you go like, you kind
Yeah.
of fluff it up that's what it was. It was my darkest moment. It was my darkest year. It was what I want to call what I consider like my rock bottom. I know that for many people, it's a different definition. It maybe to some people it wasn't so catastrophic, but for me in my life, it was the thing that had to get me to my knees,
Mm.
if that makes any sense. And I had no other choice but to surrender, right? And although during that moment, what I thought it was the thing that was, um, so huge in my life, what it all really was is to redirect my life and my eyes to Christ. I can say that now. I couldn't tell you that that's what it was while it was happening. Um, but from that moment on, it was like, okay, now I will never forget. I was living in my apartment. We had not purchased the house yet, so we weren't in our we were living in our apartment. Had just dropped off the kids at school, so I was back home alone. And I literally just like dropped to my knees in the middle of my living room. Like this is it. Like I can no longer continue like this. And I remember it was almost like an audible voice where it was like, you have to get up. Like, this is not it,
Mm.
but you have to show up.
Wow.
And that to me was like, oh, because I knew, this wasn't like, oh my God, I've never known that God shows up. Like I knew what it was. Like I didn't question it. I didn't, I was like, I'm not going crazy. I knew what it was. So from that moment on, it was like, okay, but you can either continue to try to maneuver your life how you want to, right?
Mhm.
Or you can decide that this is that moment, that this is it. You're now have to intentionally walk with Christ. Like this is it for you. So that was my I want to say my like aha moment,
Wow.
with God. And then from there, it's been freaking phenomenal and magical. And it's not to say that it's been easy. It's not to say that it's been, gardens and flowers, but it's been phenomenal in a way that I have been able to see God's grace, God show up in my life. God, I mean, we can sit here for freaking days.
I love the way that you explained the visual that you got home and you just dropped to your knees, because I think that that is how most of us encounter God. I'm not saying all of us, like, of course,
Right.
everyone has their own experience, but I think that usually the moment when we become aware that we can no longer control our lives, that we can't will the things in our lives to happen the way that we want, that
Right.
we drop down, and it's like that moment of surrender where we say, like, I can't do it.
Right.
Like, but I know that if I give it to God, we can, and it's like those moments that we cry out to the Lord. And like we read it in the Bible. When we hear everybody says, so and so cried out to the Lord. And then when you think about it, like when I read the Bible and I read that, generally I don't put it in the context of today. It seems real old fashioned, like, well, what do they mean they cry out to the Lord? But then if I spend some time really, right, if I spend some time really thinking about it, it's like when crying out to the Lord is when you say, oh my God, or God, help me, say, like, that is what crying out to the Lord is. Like, I remember a couple of weeks ago, and this is, it's not anything really spiritual, but in that moment, I swear that I felt like the only person that could take away my pain was like Jesus.
Right.
So, I just moved into a new home. I'm still trying to learn the house, right? Because it's new, everything is new. I'm not really sure how things work. So I'm in the garage and I'm going in there, I'm looking for something, I get what I need. And because we have to fix it so that it can electronically shut, we have to manually, up until we can get that fixed, we have to manually open it and close it.
Right.
So I pull it down. And so if like the garage doors, they like have grooves so that it can like bend down.
Right.
Me and my stupidity. So I put my hands like in the opening to bring it down. And my fingers got stuck in there.
Of
Like
course.
I have my fingers like this and the whole thing just closes and my fingers are stuck. And it was the worst pain, Yvette, that I've ever experienced. And I've given birth twice. And I can tell you that pain of jamming my fingers was the worst pain I've ever felt. And in that moment, like I couldn't get them out. Like I didn't know how to open it. And then like I'm thinking, all right, if I try to pull them, like I can literally break my fingers.
Right.
Circulation. Like there was so many things happening in like the matter of 15 seconds as I'm trying to figure in my brain, how the heck am I gonna get this out? Because I'm outside, my husband was inside the house in the basement, and I'm just screaming to the top of my lungs. I'm like, like you would think that I was getting like attacked, but no one heard me. My husband did. So like, I'm like, okay, nobody's coming to save you right now, girl. You need to figure it out. So like my quick thinking, I said, well, let me try to shove the damn door back up to release it. So it's like I bent my knees and I went back up and I like shoved it up. My fingers released. But
okay.
Once I got them out, that is when I felt the freaking pain.
Yeah.
When I tell you that I was crying and screaming, like screeching in pain, you would think that somebody was killing me because it was so
oh my God,
bad. And in that moment, I'm saying, God, please, Lord. And I'm calling him all the names, like, please, like, take away this pain. Because in that moment, it was like the only person that can take this away is God Almighty. Like, he's the only one that could come and release it. And then my poor husband, he finally hears the commotion. He's like, what happened? And then now I can laugh about it.
Right.
But like the week before, the same thing had happened to my husband, and he told me, right? But I guess it didn't register. I didn't think about it. So me and my
Oh my God.
That's the same thing happened to me. But he's like, oh my God, I know exactly how it is. But I still have to say that when we have reached like the threshold
Yeah.
of pain that we can tolerate in our life, or the chaos that we can't go no more, like the one we call out to is God. And I think that for anyone who is struggling right now in their own journey or in their own faith, or wondering, well, when am I going to have my own personal encounter with God? Like, you're going to know, because it's going to be the moment where you know you can't do it by yourself anymore.
Right, right. And sometimes, sometimes it's not this like huge, monumental, glamorous experience. Sometimes it comes in those little like quiet moments, but for the ones like myself that are a little bit on the stubborn side, right? And the ones that think that you know it all, you're intelligent, like you got this, like you're on top of the world. Sometimes we are the ones that need to be brought down
To the
to our
knees.
knees, right? Because it's going to be the only way
Yeah.
that you're going to come to his feet, right? So for me, that was my experience. And as time has gone, faith grows stronger, it matures, so that for me, that was my experience.
And so you said you've been married for 20 years, like that's incredible. Congratulations on that, because I know what it takes to make a marriage last
Thank you.
that long. Is your husband also on the same faith journey? Have you guys grown together in that area?
So it's interesting because my husband grew up in the Catholic church, in terms of, it's not that his family is, devoted Catholics. It's more so traditional, culturally, you go to church,
I think him and I were probably raised the same as it relates to religion and
right. You do your communion, you do,
all the sacraments.
whatever the sacraments, you go to church on Father's Day, Mother's Day, Easter,
Yes. Yep.
There's never been a lack of relationship with God. It's just it's just different, right? However, he is the person that he's never said no to me, like, let's go to church. Or if I said, hey, listen, I just saw this sermon, can we watch it? He's always there. He's always open. He's asked questions. But there's this beautiful, which is, I feel like the older we get, the more, I hate that I'm going to say this because I feel like now he's going to use this against me. Like, just like the more obsessed I am with him, like the more, the more like in love I am, because I see how much space he gives me, and I see how much he just allows, right? Like allows to be. And with that, he's never judged. He's never made me feel like, oh, not because you're Christian, or not because you're, you're following. Never. That's never been the case. So to answer your question, like yes or no, right? Like, yes, he's always there. No, like it's not like he's been baptized and he's, but he's never been opposed to
I think
the conversation.
my husband, they're very similar, like in that same exact way.
Yeah.
My husband is a Catholic school boy. Like, he went to Catholic high schools, grew up Catholic in the same sense, like as you said, as your husband. But like you, like he has really given me the space to explore my own faith and grow in it.
Right.
And like, I do a lot. I'm in so many things, even with the Bible study that you know that you're a part of every week. It's like the 1 hour commitment to the meeting, but then it's all the other prep work that happens before that. Like he's always just
There,
there.
just there, you know, and it's, you don't really realize it. And this is the beauty of maturing in your marriage, right? Like this is the beauty of making it to the other side, is that you've passed those years of, you know, your tit for tat, your immature arguments, right? Your differences in raising children, your like all those things. Like once you pass that and you graduate from that, and now you step into like the mature relationship, it is something that is phenomenal.
I would agree.
Phenomenal, you know, and
And
it
not to say
is,
that and not to say that it's perfect, because I don't want people
oh,
to
100%.
that,
Right.
but even in with all the flaws in that, the arguments become so much less. And then it's like so insignificant. Like
Right.
we don't even argue. There's just things that might annoy me about him, or
Right.
that I do that annoy him. But it's like also those are the things that I love.
Right. Agreed. Agreed. And
But
it's,
with him,
yeah, and you know, sometimes I feel like I don't say enough to him, where it's like, dude, I appreciate you. Like you literally let me live, you know, and he's quiet, he's reserved, he's not the outspoken one. You see him and I, and you're like, wow, like this was the human God had for me, 100%, without a doubt.
right.
Without a doubt. And it's interesting because um when the day of our anniversary, my daughter goes to me, you know, like, how do you feel? Like, mom, like that's a long time. Like you've been with him more than you were with grandma. And I'm like, you know, I don't know. I just, you know, I appreciate your dad's like patience with me. And I appreciate that he's just always there. And she's like, she said it like pretty nonchalantly, just bypassing. She's like, of course, I mean, mom, like you're always all over the place and doing 1,001 things at a time. Like dad is your human. And I was
Mhm.
like, oh my God, like I don't tell him enough. But yeah, it's just it's nice to be on this side.
Let me ask
Of
you,
the marriage.
how do you get past the hard moments to get to this side? And I want to talk a little bit about that because Valentine's Day is this week, and I know that so many people either they long for love or they want to make their current relationships better and stronger. They may not have the tools or the language to even use to start working towards getting to the other side. Because sometimes when you're in the hard moment, the other side, you can't even see it.
Oh yeah, it's so far. It's so far. Um, this may not sit well with many people,
Mm.
and it may,
What works for you? And that's what I'm saying. Like, what worked for you?
yeah, and it's probably, it's a very controversial topic just because in the life and space in which we live today. But simply put, it is very clear in my home what our gender roles are.
Mm,
Very clear. And I do believe that although I am a strong woman, I am outspoken, I am driven, I am in an industry where it is male dominant. I am sitting in rooms where it's sometimes only men, but I am a woman in my home.
mm,
I allow my husband to be the man, and I am the woman in my home. I am not doing his job for him, whether I see him doing it right, whether I see him doing it wrong, whether I agree, whether I disagree. I let him drive this family. And although I know that in today's world we live in this, you know, how do I say?
women want to, and I know what you're saying,
Mhm.
And what I would say is that I think every marriage is different. And so with that said, you know what works for your marriage, and you honor that, and you understand it, and so does he. And I think that so often what we find in relationships is that people don't understand their role in the relationship, regardless of what that may be, whether it is adhering to traditional gender roles, and then you play your role, based on what you have developed in your relationship, or whether it's different. Like in my marriage, I wouldn't say it's 50-50, because there's no way it can always
Never, ever,
never equal.
ever.
But we don't necessarily, I mean, there are things that like he will do because he's the man, like I don't like taking out the trash. So you go take out the garbage. I mean, are there times where I may do it? Yeah, but it's like, that's fine. But also now, because my schedule's a little bit more, that allows me to work from home, we split the cooking. There were times when I was going into the office every day, he was home first. So because he was home, it just made sense. You get dinner started, and then when I get home, I'll wash dishes, so
well, there's
the partnership in marriage.
Yeah, but that right there is him taking care of his home.
Yes.
It's not, I'm doing my wife a favor, it's he's taking care of his home. What I mean by gender roles is it passes the cooking and then cleaning, and it passes, it goes way past that.
You let him be the man.
I let him be the man, and I don't cripple him. I don't cripple him, and I don't judge him, and I'm not on his, excuse my language, his shit, because he's not doing things the way it appeases me, And I think that in today's culture, we've crippled our men, right? But then we also want him to show up, so it's either like which one are we choosing? So for me, how did I get to the other side is understanding. We both understand each other. We both understand what is our, what we contribute to our home, what we contribute to our kids, and then what we contribute to each other.
Also the responsibility that comes with being a husband and a father, and then the responsibility that comes with being a wife and a mother. Right, they're two separate roles. So a husband can't be a wife, right? And vice versa. And I think that that's what you're saying, like so eloquently, as far as what's helped you to get to the other side. And I would have to agree, because from my own personal experience, me and my husband, we struggled so much very early on in our relationship, because I didn't understand what role I was supposed to play.
Of course.
In my marriage and as a wife. And what I mean is that when in my household, growing up with my parents, they were very like traditional. It was machismo. Like in my house, my father was a traditional, or is, because he's still alive, God bless him. But he's a traditional, Latino man. He expects, to be catered on hand and foot. The woman is the one that cooks, cleans, and he's the one that goes out and he earns the money. That was that
generation.
Right. That was how he ran the household. And so my mother also, like, she had to ask permission for things. If she wanted money, like he controlled the money because he was the one that was working. It was those things.
Right.
And those things worked for them and their marriage. But now here I am, a young girl, trying to figure out what that means. Me as a young wife, being raised in this household, seeing how my mom was being a wife, but then also being taught by my dad, well, I don't want you to be like your mom. I want you to be independent. I don't want you to have to rely on any man to take care of you, make sure you go to school. Yeah. So, and it's crazy. That's exactly what it was, because what I was seeing and what I was being told were so contradictory that when I got married, I was like, what the heck
What am I doing?
do? Am I supposed to take care of my husband? Should I not take care of him? Like, should I
Am I
cook? Like,
submitting? Am I cooking? Am I serving? Am I not serving?
I was so confused, and it caused so many problems in our marriage, and then him too, because now he comes into the marriage with his own experiences, and his parents are still together. They've had a long marriage and relationship, so he's coming in with whatever he's learned and seen from his parents, and we're trying to figure it out, and we were making a mess.
Right.
It was horrible.
Right.
But I would agree that once we said, wait a minute, we need to do this for ourselves and define what we want our marriage to be, that was when things started to change. That was when we started to kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel to get us to, like what you say, to the other side.
Yeah, and that's commitment. That's commitment, because that goes way, way past love.
Yes.
It's commitment. Like, okay, it's
right?
not. It's not, and it's not enough. It's not
Let me
enough.
tell you, and sometimes you don't feel like you love your partner.
100%.
And I want to just be real about that. There are moments when I was like, why did I even get married? Like sometimes, and not to say that the love isn't there. It's just to say that sometimes you don't feel like you love them. That's why it's so important to be able to discern your feelings. Because the things that you always feel are not necessarily facts. It's not always true. You might feel something in the moment that's not based on anything other than your anger, your frustration. Maybe you feel like you're not being heard or appreciated, and that can make you feel a certain way. But when you step back from that and you allow yourself to calm down and you release the anger and all those emotions that you were feeling, you understand, no, I really do love this person, because you're not allowing the heat of the moment to convince your brain that your heart is feeling something that it really isn't feeling. And I think, go ahead, yeah.
No, I was going to say, there's the evidence of marriage will never be 50-50, ever. There are seasons in which one is carrying more than the other, and there are other seasons that one is carrying it for the both of us to just get us through. But where there's that commitment, that is where you're able to thrive. That's where you see your marriage completely, blossom and turn into something unimaginable, right? Because I'm pretty sure we've been together. We both have similar years in our relationships. So I'm pretty sure you can attest that you didn't know that you were going to make it to this.
Girl, no, just this morning, we're laying in bed and my husband is like, our life is so good. He's like, do you believe it?
Wow.
And I said,
wow.
You know what? I believe it now because we're here.
Wow.
But there were times when I didn't believe it, and he says the same thing, that there were moments where he wondered if we would ever get to the place where we are right now. And, to me, it's just the grace of God.
Amen.
Because honestly, on our own, we could have never made it to the other side, because we almost didn't. But it was like what you said, it was the commitment that made us stay. And I just want to be like really honest. We did everything. We went to marriage counseling. We did therapy through our church. We had conversations with other married people. Like, we really did it. And we did our own individual work, because a lot of times we have to work through our own traumas that we don't even realize are traumas, because we've never spent the time to really dissect why we think the things that we think, why we act certain ways, what our triggers are.
100%.
Because all of those things you bring to your relationship.
Let me tell you something. There was a season in our life where, just like, this is where you and I connected, by the way. It was our story.
Yeah, we're gonna get into that next too. Like how we connected.
Where we were gonna call it quits. And the sad part about that is, and this is where God has showed up, that this is where there will never be anything that will ever make me believe that there is no God, because there is no way that we would have gone through it without him.
Yeah.
But there was a time in which we were gonna call it quits, and I was okay with it, which was probably the worst thing of it all, right? Anyway, that's to say that when we went to therapy, one of the things that was brought up is how much I said, I don't need you.
Mm, mhm.
It just blew my mind that this was like the one thing that was, because I'm like, I remember there were other words that I've used, right, that were probably hurtful for me, that had more weight in hurt, right? But
Right,
for him, it was, you continuously saying you don't need me, then what are we doing?
right.
And it's just one of those things where it's like, okay, hold on. Then I had to go to therapy on my own. Then that's when my journey began into, why do I behave the way that I behave, and why do I choose to say these words? Because they're not just coming out of thin air. There's a reason why I'm saying the things that I'm saying. And it came to show why I grew up in a family where the women in my life were independent entrepreneurs, strong women that didn't have that support from a male figure. Seeing that, it was like, wow, I didn't have that example of that marriage where,
And you internalized in your mind that you didn't need a man. Because
right?
why would you need a man? Like, you could do it by yourself. And you've seen in your family all these amazing, incredible women do it on their own. But I love that you share that, because I think a lot of people, when they're in dysfunctional relationships, or when their relationship isn't going the way that they want it to go, they immediately just blame their partner and the thing that their partner, things that their partners aren't doing,
Mhm.
or are doing. And sometimes we have to step back and also look, well, how am I contributing
Right.
the dysfunction in this relationship by the way that I show up, by my actions, by the things that I'm saying, because it takes two. And if you're treating your partner a certain way, then the partner is not going to have any recourse but to respond to how they're being treated, whether that's good in a good way or in a not so good way. So being able to work through our own things is so important to establishing healthy relationships. And I think that that's true for any relationship, whether
100.
it's your marriage, whether it's friendships, whether it's your relationship with your children. You yourself have to be healthy first.
Mhm.
You have to have a healthy relationship with yourself and understand yourself before you can even step into a relationship with someone else and have expectations of them that you yourself have not even risen to within your own
Mhm.
relationship with yourself.
My father didn't teach me many things, but there are very few things that have always like stuck with me. And he would always say, be careful who you point your finger to. Be very careful, because while you're pointing one, there's three fingers pointing back at you. So be very careful. Edit yourself, correct yourself, see before you open your mouth, where was your contribution in this situation. And although I should have listened to that, right? Early on, it is now obviously that it's like, oh, duh, that makes
It's,
sense.
it's that, what, we also have to be ready.
Right.
Have to be ready to learn it, right? It's like that saying that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what it is. You have to be in a space in your life where you can receive
Mm-hmm.
the lesson or the message that is being spoken to you. Because if you're not ready, you're going to resist it. And it doesn't matter who says it to you. It doesn't matter what's happening. You're automatically going to have a wall that is not going to allow for that message or that lesson, to filter through to where you need it.
100%. 100%.
I love having these kinds of conversations with women who have gone through it.
Mm-hmm.
So often, whether it's on social media, whether it's like on TV, you hear, I always cringe when I hear people say that they're relationship experts and they're not in relationships.
Mm-hmm.
How are you an expert if you yourself are not even in a relationship? All you can teach people is like what hasn't worked. Like,
Right.
how can you coach
Right.
someone on having
Right.
a healthy, successful relationships when
Right.
you don't have one?
Mhm.
Also, I have an issue with the term expert anyway. Like,
Mhm.
I hate the word expert because it gives off this thing where it's like you know it all,
Mhm.
and no one
Like,
knows.
unless you're 90, right? Because
Yes, right.
I want to listen to these people that are in their 80s. Like, if you search like YouTube and you'll search like advice from an 85-year-old, from it's just it's wisdom, right? But if you're 30, not to, take away your or discredit your, educational background, because this, let's be honest, this is what it is.
You're not here for it. We're not trying to hear. We're not trying to call you. We don't want to hear you.
What are we doing? Yeah.
You haven't gone through enough things. And then it's true, because when you think about just life in terms of age, right? I always say, when you from the minute you're born to like about 20, you don't know anything. I mean, even at 20, you don't know anything, right? I feel like we really start to get our education like from 21 and onward. Like, up until that age, you're still really a toddler, like a baby. You haven't gone through anything. Your parents have been taking care of you.
Right.
Haven't had to pay bills for the for the most part. There's, I think, the outliers, the very few, because of whatever cards life have dealt them, they have a different path. But for the most part, up until 21, you are under your parents' thumb.
Right.
And then, from 20 to 30, you're getting to learn yourself a little bit. You're exploring your independence, because now you can go out there, you can do whatever you want. You don't have your parents hovering over you. You become responsible for yourself. That by 30, you will hope that you have now become a little bit more serious about your life. You start to kind of think about the future. What do you want? But I say all that, like, at 30, even 40, you still don't know a lot. There's not that much you know yet. Even me now at 45, like, I when I turned 40, I say that was like my best year, because at that age was when I felt my most confident. Like, at that age,
that all the time. I hear that is the most common used phrase, and especially women. It's like, when I turned 40, that's when it was really like, okay, I've arrived.
yeah, it is. And I don't know what it is, but it's like, you know who you are for the most part. You're not easily swayed by what other people say. You don't even care what people say about you. Like, you have really grown into accepting yourself as you are. And there's so much freedom in that. But even in that, like, I'm still learning so many different things about myself at 45.
You're like, what?
Yes, as a woman, as a mother, as a wife, as a friend. It's just incredible. So, like, we go through life, clocking the years and our age. And for me, it's like every day that I get to live is a bonus. Like, I want to grow old. I don't want to deny my age. I don't want to be embarrassed of how old I am, because every year that we're alive is a gift that God has given us to do more, to be present, to live, to serve, to thrive. And I know you recently turned 40, right?
39.
39. I'm sorry, I'm confusing you with somebody else. Somebody just recently.
I turned 40 in April.
40. Oh, so you're gonna be 40.
This is what I was telling you. April 15th is the sisterhood, I think, conference.
Women's conference. Yes. And that's your birthday. That's what it was. Okay, right. Not that you're 40, but yeah, you told me you're gonna turn 40. Oh, girl, it's gonna be incredible.
I know.
It's something that just happens. It's like the switch just flips as soon as you hit 40. It gets better. Life gets better the older that you get.
I agree. And I think is also in the getting to know yourself, right? Like, there's the world is so big when you're in your 20s, and then it just starts, kind of like getting smaller and smaller, in sense of that you are now more comfortable with yourself. You have your non-negotiables. You have grown into who you want to be. You're stepping into, the woman you want to be. And I think that that's where the magic happens, right? Because now it's like, what it is that you're expecting of yourself. in the world that you're living. And I think it comes with age because you don't have to deal with, everything else.
And then you don't care. And then
You don't care.
and also, once I feel like by the time you're in your 40s, for the most part, you've gotten a good grip on your life, right? As far as like your relationship is going the way that you want it to go, your relationship with your kids has already been established, your career, like all of those things. And then also you have no tolerance for nonsense.
Yeah.
Like there are things that you said you just don't accept anymore because you already know like what you're worth, what you're willing to accept, and what you're no longer going to waste time on.
Yeah.
For me, that's been probably the greatest lesson
Mhm.
of getting older, that I know what I'm willing to deal with and what I'm not. Like there's just some things I'm not going to deal with anymore.
And you also turn your life to Christ in your 40s. So that's major.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes. And it's nothing, it's not crazy because I don't believe anything is coincidental. I think everything is right on time, exactly the way that it's supposed to happen. And I've always been someone, like I've always believed in God. I've always believed that Jesus was my savior. I grew up in the Catholic Church, just like, like your husband. But there comes a time where you drift away from it. And not that I drifted away from God and knowing that he was my source, but he was never my priority.
Mm.
And I was allowing the ways of the world to influence me, and who I was and how I showed up, how I treated myself, how I treated others. But again, it's not until you find yourself in a really dark place and you see that your way isn't working and that the world can't help you, that you say, well, the only one that I could turn to is God. And that's what it was. And in 2018, like I have been not searching for God because he was already in my life, but I was looking to reconnect with him in a more intimate way. And it's funny because once you get the thought in your mind and once you get the desire in your heart, little by little, God is going to start to move the things around in your life to make that happen. And he's going to do it in the ways that he knows you're going to pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a moment around 2018 where I remember telling my sister, I was like, yo, I really want to like go to a church. Like I wanted to get connected to a church. There was just like a desire in me, but I also knew I didn't want to go back to the Catholic Church.
Right.
But just because it wasn't my thing, and no shade with Catholicism, but being a Catholic never taught me to seek a relationship with God. It taught me to be afraid only, that God was somebody I had to fear, that it wasn't someone I could turn to in my darkest moments. It was just like, just be scared. And I grew up with like the fear of God, but not understanding the love.
Right. Right.
So I wanted to connect with a church where I could worship God, where I could pray, and where I wouldn't feel bad for wanting to like sing to the Lord. And so I was always on Instagram. I mean, I'm still always on Instagram, but I remember I connected with someone on Instagram who was always like sharing about her church. And one day it was like January 29, was it 2019? No, it was 2018, January 2018. And they were starting, like, they always start with like a New Year's fast, 21 days of prayer and fasting. And she was sharing, and I was like, oh, that seems interesting. I kind of want to see what that is. So I messaged her.
And a way to start your Christian life by fasting.
Oh, girl, una loca. So I said, oh, I'd really be interested in doing that. Can you send me more information? So we exchanged emails and she did. And then we developed a connection that way. So we always then would go back and forth, messaging each other on Instagram. And then one day she was like, oh, well, you should come to my church. Like she invited me to attend. And I was like, okay, sure, I'll go. And I remember the first time I went, it was just me and my kids. Like my husband didn't want to go because he wasn't into it. Like, whatever, go.
Right.
So he said, yeah, you can go. I went with my kids. And they had the children's ministry. So the kids went to theirs, I went to mine. And it was like the church that I had been looking for. Like as soon as I walked in, I really felt like I belonged there. And like that was their thing. You belong. You belong before you even know that it was powerful. And then when you feel like the sermon is for you, like
Of course.
like the sermon was for me. And I kept going back. And Yvette, I didn't miss a Sunday that whole year. I went every single Sunday. And then eventually I was telling my husband, I was like, you really should come. Like, I think you would enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
And he started attending with me. And we would go every single Sunday. My kids loved it. And like, that was how I got reconnected with a church. And then 2019, that June, they were having baptisms. And like, I knew that I wanted to recommit myself in that way. Like, I knew, like, I had already given my life back, but I wanted to make like the public
declaration. This was your declaration.
Like, I'm yours, God.
Mm-hmm.
And I did it. And
wow.
I've been walking the walk. Like I say, I'm still a baby. I don't know it all. I don't pretend to know it all. And I know like there's still things that I struggle with.
Mm-hmm.
But what I do know is that I'm not the person who I was.
Mm-hmm.
There are things that I used to enjoy that I don't enjoy anymore.
This is, I don't want to interrupt you. I know there's probably like podcast etiquette, but
Girl, this is the conversation between two friends.
So this was, I don't know if you remember, I don't remember what week it was that we were discussing, we were talking about this, just showing up, right? Like just showing up and how the image that is portrayed or what was taught is that if you're following Christ, this is what you should look like, right? Back in the day was women were not allowed to wear, makeup and this and, all this stuff.
All the rules, all these rules.
Right. So all these rules. And then now you're like, wow, I'm stepping into this almost like taking a leap of faith, right? Because you making this decision to follow Christ, it does come with certain things. However, the beauty in this, and this is where I say, unless you're in the spirit and unless you understand Christ, what I'm saying sounds crazy. Right? Yeah. Which is, it's not that he takes away these things. It's not that he's like, because you're following me, you are no longer allowed to listen to secular music. It is that your spirit, your soul, it is you no longer desire, because what you desire now is different.
You just desire God.
It's just different. So it's not that, so it's very hard to articulate it to someone that is not walking with Christ, right? Because what they're seeing is, oh, tú eres cristiana, like this is, you don't do this, or, I'm not going to tell you this because you're Christian. It's like, no, that's not the case. I choose to no longer want that. Let me tell you something, Nancy.
Just so true though.
Anybody that knows me knows you could not get me out of a club.
Girl, me too.
I danced
for 5 years, 6 years apart. Of course, we never probably would have clubbed together.
Right.
If we were the same age, we would have been in the same clubs.
It was New York City was in my back pocket.
Yeah.
And I remember I used to say, like, I am going to be 100 years old that no one's going to get me out of a club, right? Because it was just the things that I just loved dancing. It's not to say that I don't love dancing now.
Right.
I just do not want to be in a club anymore. Could I be in a club 100%? We can go and celebrate a friend's birthday and I'm going to be okay. But is that something that I desire? No, right? My eyes are open to other things that I am not comfortable with anymore, that I just don't,
you don't want to be,
I don't feel like I belong there, right? But it's not to say that God prohibits me from being there. Does that make sense?
Love that you said that, because I think that that's the biggest misconception that people get when you tell them you're born again, that you're saved, that you follow God. They automatically think that you just stop living. And
this is how you're walking all day.
You live fully in Christ, and it's true. You just don't desire it anymore. Right. Like, I really don't. I mean, I met my husband in a club. Drunk. I was drunk when I met him. That the night we met, I vomited in his car. Not, not too sexy. That's not the best,
right.
story, but it's just to show like who I was. And if you would have told me 25 years ago, girl, when you're 45, you're gonna be, your heart is gonna only be for God, and everything you do is gonna be for, I would have laughed.
Leading women to Christ.
Yeah, I would have been like,
talking.
no, there's no way.
Uh-huh.
There's no way. But that's why you just never know the path you're supposed to walk. And sometimes we have to have those previous lives, right? Where we are of the world, so that we can be the testimony that says God can change anybody.
100%.
And
100%.
God is the one that does it. Like, I remember when I first got baptized.
Sorry to cut you off, and it's continuous.
Yes.
It's continuous, because let me tell you something. There are people that met me last year that I would literally have to reintroduce myself today, just last year.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So even the ones that knew you 5 years ago really don't know you.
100%. And they're stuck on the idea of who Ivette was, right? And they're stuck on this, well, this is what she was doing, but look at her now, right? And it's almost offensive to people, right? And then, you have to go through, and when you're with Christ, you go through your moments where you want to kind of be in both worlds a little bit. You want to appease the people that have been in your life, but then also serve God. God is telling you those are not your people. So you do struggle with that. It's not until you cross over completely where you are okay with who you are, that you no longer have to feel like you have to justify your behavior, right? But I always say, if we met 12 months ago and we have not spoken, we literally have to, I have to reintroduce myself to you, because I'm no longer the person that I was 12 months ago, let alone 5 years.
Yeah. And I think that's also important for people to understand, that as we grow and evolve, that there are going to be people in our lives who are not going to understand it, because they only understand the old version of you, and they may try to keep you stuck of who you were. But God is calling you to step into the version He's calling you to be, and you're going to have to make a choice. And sometimes that results in losing people who we were really close to at one time.
Yeah.
And that is painful, and that is hurtful, because now you have to look at your life like, wow, I had so many great memories and times with this person, but we don't connect anymore on the same things that used to connect us before, right? So there's no way, like, the people you used to go clubbing with, if they're still clubbing, there's nothing for you and those people to connect with now, because you're not in that space anymore.
We're lost in translation.
Right.
We've reached the point where we're literally speaking different languages. And it's not to say, I always hold space for people and be gracious, because I know how patient God was with me, right? Because there is this self-righteousness that a lot of Christians, live by, which is why it is so difficult for the ones that we don't live like that to bring other people, right? To make disciples, to bring other people, because they already have this preconceived notion of what it is to be Christian, where it's not what it is. So I've taught myself to be empathetic and understand that when you do not know Christ, there's a reason why you behave the way that you do, right? There's a reason, because you don't know, you haven't seen the light, you don't know the God that I know. And it's not up until then that it's tough, because you almost have to remove yourself. Let me see how can I articulate this. Remove yourself while still showing grace.
Yes. Right. And and that is hard, right? Sometimes, but I think and this is what I always try to remind myself of, like, how would Jesus act in this situation, right? I may personally want to respond in a certain way because I'm human, right? But then I have to pause. And if I pause for a moment and ask myself, like, what would Jesus do? That allows me to have more empathy, to have more grace, to not respond in a defensive way. Because what I do know about interacting with people is that what others give to you or give to us has nothing to do with really us at all. It has to do with whatever is going on within themselves that they're projecting. And they might see something in me that's triggering them, but it's always about them. And it's never about me. And once I learned to understand that, it really has allowed me to show up in the world so much differently and in such a more in a peaceful way, where I don't have to be angry, where I don't have to clap back, where I don't have to be petty.
Right. Like you don't have to feel the need to be combative, right? Because now you're like, I know that this is the opportunity for me to be able to show that person that Jesus is not who they believe it to be, right? Yeah.
It's been all right. So it's been an incredible conversation. I can talk to you for hours. I knew that this was how this conversation was gonna go. I didn't even ask you any of the questions I sent you. Like I'm here looking at the questions. I'm like,
I know.
And it's already been an hour. We've been into this conversation for an hour.
We can do this 100%.
There has to be like a part 2 or part 3. I mean, I don't know, because there's so many things that we didn't even like tap into. We talked a lot about faith. I didn't even talk to you about like the work that you do, your career.
You know, that's what I believe it or not, it again, if you would have asked me this just a couple of years ago, it would have been very different. I would be pitching here how, you know, I'm your best realtor, that I can show you, you know, how to get financial freedom. I can show you how to invest and work through your finances and, you know, buy a piece of the land here in New York or whatever. Although that is my work, and although I am super passionate about what I do, that is literally like 10% of my life, where it was 100, right? Where it is what occupied all of me. It is.
But whoever's listening to this podcast now or watching on YouTube, if you need assistance with purchasing, renting a home, you want to get financial freedom, all the things that Ivette just mentioned, then absolutely reach out to her, because
100%. Yeah, thank you.
She is the person to reach out to. The one thing I want to talk about before we kind of end this conversation for today is the power of connecting. And we didn't talk about how we met, but I want to talk a little bit about that, because I know that there's so many women who are looking for community. There's so many women who struggle having healthy relationships with women. And I want to talk about just you and I. We just met. When was the Dream Lab the conference? Was that October?
October.
It was.
Audrey will kill me. It was definitely towards the end of 2022. Yeah.
And so that was how you and I met. You know, and it was, I had gotten invited to be a speaker. I spoke on the relationship panel. I was probably the oldest one in the room, the one, aside from Ivette, the one that has probably been married, you know, the longest. But I always say that you never know who your story is going to resonate with, because you might think you're the odd person out and that no one's going to connect. And if you might be ambivalent in sharing your story, because you're like, oh, well, no one's going to relate to that. No one's going to. But look, because I was a woman of faith, because I had shared, you know, my relationship and the things that we had kind of struggled with, that was what had resonated most with you. And then we connected because of that.
So here's the funny backstory to that, is that Audrey has always held these conferences and rooms, right? And every year she'll send it to me like, hey, here's the link. And I'm like, girl, no, like, I'm not, no. So a lot of my work is dependent on networking, referrals, and being in the same rooms with business people, right? Like groups of people. And so I'm always the person to be like, no, you know, I'm not going to be in a room where there's fluff. There's something that triggers me when I hear we're gonna create generational wealth, and it's like, okay, well, how are we gonna get there, right? Like I don't want, I
You
don't
want,
need.
the real, this is my thing. I don't want to just see people that have made it. Okay, that's great.
How?
I want to know the how. Give me something that I can take away that I can apply when I leave the conference, not just
Right.
the inspirational story. Yes,
I don't need,
I
right.
think it comes with age. Me and you, like,
Right. I'm like, I don't need, the motivation. I don't need, someone to. My husband's, I'll say, like, my sister-in-law, she had said to me, I think it was like 2 years ago, she was like, someone said to her, don't be a wind-up doll. And
right.
I was like, what? And she's like, yeah, don't be, like those wind-up dolls that they need someone to wind them up so
Oh,
that.
yes.
And that clicked. I was like, oh my God, that is so true. And although I do every day intentionally listen to certain YouTubers and certain messages for just to activate the brain, I don't need motivation to get going, right?
Right. Right.
So with Audrey, she was like, these are the panels. And I was like, I can't do the fluff. I can't do the
Everything is great.
with me, like the girl, and we're women, and we're gonna be like, what are we? I'm not gonna sit through 4 hours of that, right?
Yeah.
And she was like, Ivette, I promise you, like, you're not, this is no fluff. And I was like, I thought about it. So one of my very close friends, she's a mortgage lender. And I was like, hey, do you want to go to this? I don't know who's going to be talking. I don't know if we're going to walk away with anything, but it'll be a nice Saturday to spend. And she was like, yes, let's do it. We go, and we got there a little bit late because parking was horrendous. So we sit all the way in the back. Panelists are talking, people are talking. I want to say you came in second or third panel, like second or third group, because I had, yeah. So as you're talking and talking, I was like, oh, that was, and there were great people there, great panelists, women that really shared real
Yeah.
great information. But what stuck to me the most was how impactful your words were with disclosing how important God is in your life. And the reason why that stuck out to me so much was because I planned my year, October, November. I planned the year ahead. Like generally, like, this is what I want to do. And one of my biggest prayers for this year was, so I don't want to cry, right? Because I'm a strong woman. I'm not.
Let me say something about tears. Honestly, and this is for every woman that is afraid to show them. It takes incredible strength and vulnerability to cry, to allow yourself and give yourself the permission to cry. So I always encourage women, if that's what you feel and that's what your spirit is telling you to do, let those tears flow. It's hard
Yeah,
to let the tears flow. I feel like it's much easier to hold them back.
yeah,
It's really
yeah.
allow yourself to cry.
So last year I went through a very difficult but great moment. And we'll discuss this on another time. I had to get a hysterectomy. A hysterectomy was October 28th.
Mm.
So I want to say that conference was a little bit before that.
Yeah.
Anyway, long story short.
Because I saw the Instagram live that you did with Audrey talking about your procedure.
So I had made a promise to God, and I was like, listen, I know that I have always promised, I'm going to take care of myself, whatever the case is. And I was like, but if not to test you, not to, you're not a genie in a bottle, do your will, like whatever it is that you need to do, let it be. But if I do come out of this in good health, I will never say no to you. Like I will devote my life to you.
Man.
And so procedure came, everything was phenomenal, everything is great. And during the November-ish time, I had written a letter, and I was like, I need to I can no longer keep saying no to the things I know he's pushing me to do. And a lot of this is works with women. A lot of people don't know what I do privately. People know that I'm in real estate. I help women going into their own and into their entrepreneurship and all that, but people really don't know what I do behind closed doors. Long story short, I had prayed. I was like, Lord, place me in big rooms, put me with big people. I don't fear being the smallest one in the room, right? And I was like, I knew that talking is part of it, right? I knew that speaking was going to be part of his plan. A friend of mine had, which I thought she's a prophet, but she's no, she had prophesied about 3 or 4 years ago that I would be in a room, and she was like, all I see that is a room filled with chairs, and I don't know what it is, but this is what I see. And I was like, girl, like, sure, I always just like pushed it to the back burner. Now here you are, right? You come up on my stories, you come up on my, I think it was like explore, I don't know, whatever. And it was like post the conference, right? And you were sharing your experience in the conference. And then you went on a little bit more in speaking in your faith and your marriage and your relationship and how God had. I was like, oh my God, this girl is like my vibe. She speaks like how I do. She looks like me, but she's working on bigger things, right? So I click follow. You very shortly after post that you're going to host a book club. Who wants to join? I'm an avid reader. I was like, this is like my alley. I click, okay, let me just, read this. I've read this book 1,000 times before. It was a completely different experience, a different community, women that I've never met before. Then you say to me, hey, Ivette, I would like to invite you to lead in my cohort, right? And here this is the backstory, right? So here I'm like, oh my God, right? Immediately I go into prayer. Once we're done, I'm like, Lord, okay, hold on. Like, I know that I prayed this, but just give me a minute. Like, I need to prepare. One of my to-dos and goals for this month, for this quarter, was public speaking, right? Because in my head, I'm like, I go into circles. I can never articulate my point. I never get to, I never like hit it.
Girl, you get out your own head, mamita, because you are an excellent public speaker.
Oh my
Excellent.
God.
So get out your own head.
So it's part of my, of my goals. So I'm constantly, like, every day I'll do, 10, 15 minutes of training and listening to YouTubers. Long story short, you say to me that I would love for you to lead. Now, how can someone, like, I knew that I couldn't say no, not because it was you, not because, I just knew that this was God saying, listen, I have been waiting for this. Here is the opportunity. You have to show up, whether you feel prepared or not. All I need is for you to show up. Let me do the work, right? Then in all of that, then you say, I think you posted something with your podcast, I can't remember. I was like, oh my God, something. And you were like, oh my God, Ivette, I just finished journaling. And you show me a screenshot of your guests, your potential guests. And to me, here is where being faithful and obedient to God, how it manifests right now in your life.
Yeah.
I knew in my heart of hearts, and I knew in my core, that the things that God have placed me here for is for women, right? I knew that it is to honor, help, and guide. I've just always felt like I'm not qualified, right? Prepared, or have the proper credentials, right? Because we believe that we need to have these big titles to serve. I then had to realize is not an abundance.
Moses was a stuttering fool, okay? Moses was a stuttering fool.
I know.
That tried to argue with God that he could not do what God was calling him to do. So, but and it's just to say, that imposter syndrome, that's what it is. We all go through it. Every single one of us, even the most seasoned speakers, professionals, there are moments that go through the people's head that makes them think like, wow, can I really do this?
Right. But
And
it's not even a want. Like this was not for me. Let me tell you something. If it's me, if we remove God, all I want to do is make millions off of real estate.
mhm,
If I am 100% honest with you, I want to be the first millionaire in my family. I want to leave a legacy for my that is what my heart desires.
right.
What I know, what I'm really here for is not that. Therefore, it is why I've struggled so much to step into that role. But here you come, Nancy. And this is why I said to you, you're really challenging me this season because, you know,
But I just want to say something to you, that your desire with making millions of dollars can still
yes,
part of the desire that God has for your own life.
yes,
You
yes.
can still do that work while you're also here serving, because there's so many women who struggle with becoming homeowners or property owners, or really getting educated on finances, on understanding what that really means. And God is going to use you with the skills that you have to fulfill his purpose.
Amen.
And the purpose could be is just to help other women find their own financial freedom, whether that's through the finances and the money, or whether that's through investing in property, right? But God is going to use you where you are with the skills that you have, with your expertise, and the reward is going to be, yes, you get to minister his word to other women and help them, but you also get to be the millionaire that you want to become. Like, we don't have to feel guilty about the desires of our lives. Like, I've been reading, let me see if I have it here. This was one of the first books that two books I read this year. I can't find the other one. But it's the abundance book, and it's a 40-day challenge. And it's helping to curate the mindset that we can want and desire whatever it is, and that it's possible to have, and that we can still fulfill God's vision for our lives, because the God, the creator of the world, is who lives inside of us. And he created us to live abundantly. He didn't create anybody to struggle, to live in scarcity, to live with lack. Like, he wants us to have all the desires of our heart, as long as we know who our source is.
Right.
The source isn't the money, the source is our God.
100%. I think it's where I think obviously you didn't come into my life by chance, right? But this is the way that I have seen it in the past 2 months, is here is what you're saying, and here is living proof that it exists, right? So to me, seeing you, right, step into this role of, not only am I a wife, a mom, an entrepreneur, I'm leading dozens of women, to come to Christ and to live a life of happiness and joy, getting out of stuck, while also, fulfilling my personal, dreams. And so this is why I was so like, oh my God, like you have no idea the impact, right, that you've had in someone that you just met it was like seconds, like just by passing, and I think that for me, this season, to be able to see it was where it became clear.
Yeah.
That it became very, very clear. So I'm forever thankful.
Listen, I always say this though, I'm just a vessel. And I want to say this to you, right? Because you say how impactful I have been in your life, but imagine if I had not stepped into this role, and I would have allowed my own fear, my own feeling like I'm not qualified, if I would have let those things like overtake my mind to the point where I said, you know what, I'm not gonna do it, then that affects you
Mhm.
and your journey and your belief, because you're sitting here saying that because of me, I've had this impact on you. But imagine that I would have not done it.
Mhm.
This is why I do the work that I do, because I want women to see that, yeah, it's scary, but you can still do it. You can do scary things.
Mhm.
And it's only scary until you take the first step.
Right.
Once you do it, the fear goes away. You know,
Yeah.
we just met. So there's a lot you probably don't know about me, but I started off like, I'm a poet, I'm a writer, by like, that's my passion.
Wow.
And I know now, like I used to go to poetry slams, I did open mics. This was years ago, but I know that that was a part of my journey. And it's not that I'm supposed to be a poet, but it was those poetry stages
Mm.
that were helping me to hold
Prepare.
my voice, to get comfortable to speak on stages, that, you know, to for lack of a better word, to like minister
Mhm.
to people. Like I had to get comfortable with the sound of my own voice, and I
Mhm.
had to get comfortable with the being uncomfortable in
Mhm.
front of people.
Mhm.
Because it's still, I've spoken in front of huge crowds. I've done so many public speaking engagements, and right before I step on the stage, I can't even tell you how nervous I am. Like it's always like the first time.
Mhm.
Always. I'm not gonna lie to you and say it gets easier. No, you're always gonna feel nervous.
Mhm.
The difference though is that I'm so confident in who I am now. I'm so confident in my voice and the things that I'm speaking about and what I'm teaching, that once I step out and that first word comes out, then that's it. Then I'm in my glory and I can rock a stage like nobody's business. But you're always gonna be afraid until the minute you step out there. Like
Right.
it's never gonna get easier.
Right. Right.
And you just have to continue to say yes to all of the opportunities that are coming. Every time you feel uncomfortable and you want to say no, that's because that's something you want to do and you don't want to fail. Like
Mhm.
your resistance is because you want to do a good job.
Mhm.
Because if you weren't scared, then to me it's like, well, you don't really care then. You
Right.
don't care
Right.
how you show up and show out.
Mhm.
But because you're afraid, it's because you want to do a good job.
Yeah.
And then once you're there, God gives you the words. There's times when I don't even know what I'm gonna say, and I just go out with one thought. And then I always tell people, don't get me started, because once I start talking, I can't shut up.
I know it's the same. It's the same with me. So I think that that's where things get a little like blurry with me, right? Because I say to myself, like, Yvette, this is how you show up, like, regardless, like whether you're in front of this is just how you show up. Why is it difficult to show up in God's, like, for his like his will, his purpose, you know? And I think it also goes back to feeling judged, right? Or feeling like, oh, what are people gonna say? You know,
Let me tell
I
you something.
know, and then I go through that, like, who
I'm gonna
cares?
tell
Like,
you, honestly, you're gonna get judged. Like, you're gonna get judged. So
right, yeah,
just accept it.
yeah,
You're gonna get judged. And that's it. So once you accept it, then you just keep going. Because
yeah,
there's always going to be someone that doesn't like you. There's always going to be someone that says, oh, I could do better than her.
right,
People are going to have opinions. You're not here to please them. You're
right,
here to do the job that God is calling you to do.
right,
That's it. And once you know that you show up and you do your best for God, that's all you can do. Like,
right,
here's what Fulana says or what Fulano
right.
says.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
No,
so Spanish. I'm so Latina.
yeah.
Only say fulano y fulana. So any non-Spanish speaking people listening to the podcast, that is just a generic term we use to identify a person.
Whoever, right, like whoever.
Oh, okay. So I'm not going to keep you any longer. We have been talking for 90 minutes. And like I said, we could talk
Wow.
all day. Girl, yes. I'm gonna have to split this podcast into 2 episodes. Oh, but thank you so much, Yvette.
Thank you for
It's
having me.
incredible. Thank you for just being so honest and so transparent. Before I let you go, how can people connect with you? Where can they find you if they want to purchase, they want to start purchasing property, they want to get their financial, stuff in line?
Yeah. So the best and fastest way would be, well, you can go to my Instagram, Ivette_Guz, Guz. And then, yeah, that's pretty much it. You can DM me and I'm pretty responsive. I'm there.